Total War Warhammer 2 released on the 28th of September 2017 and is currently available on Windows PC through Steam activation. It's developed by Creative Assembly and published by Sega. As a brand new entry in a long established franchise, and with the fastest turnaround time for a full price game from Creative Assembly, this review will explore how the game stands on its own, how it improves as a sequel over its predecessor, and how Total War Warhammer 2 places itself in the franchise as a whole. Total War Warhammer 2 features 4 playable races: the High Elves, the Dark Elves, the Lizardmen, and the Skaven. The 4 races have a wildly different aesthetic and also have a set of distinct characteristics that make each race feel unique. The High Elves are an orderly and defensive race, relying on spearmen and powerful archers. They also depend on late game high tier monstrous units such as dragons and phoenixes to cause mass damage and chaos on the battlefield. On the campaign, they specialise in trade and diplomatic manipulation. However, both sound far more interesting than they actually play out, but we'll get to that later. The Dark Elves are in many ways the opposite of the High Elves. They favour a more dark and chaotic playstyle with hyper-aggressive units such as Witch Elves and War Hydras. Their sole purpose in battle is to cause fear and rage amongst the enemy ranks, and the more damage they do, the more powerful they become after reaching a certain threshold. On the campaign, their economy is built on slavery. The more slaves you gather, the more you earn at the cost of unrest in your cities. It's a nice balancing act that adds more depth to the campaign, and it connects your battles to your economy, so I think it's a great implementation. As well as that, they have access to Black Arcs, a unique naval unit that can build armies and provide battle support in the form of bombardment spells. The Lizardmen, one of the more outlandish races in the Warhammer universe, are extremely thick-skinned and tanky. They move slowly and have strong heavy infantry bolstered by extremely strong monstrous dinosaur units. It's often pointed out that they're basically dinosaurs riding dinosaurs, and that's essentially what you get. Don't forget that they also have floating frogs that can telepathically cast spells, so yeah, Warhammer. On the campaign, they have the Geomantic Web. The Geomantic Web is basically just a building that recognizes if you have the same building in another adjacent province. If you do, you get buffs to the province. It's simple, but it's a really nice idea to connect up regions in a chain like that, but the buffs are often so minor it hardly makes the investment worth it. The Lizardmen also have blessed spawnings, which allows instant free recruitment of high tier units upon completing missions. This was pretty neat, and it's similar to the previous game's Vampire Count's Raise Dead mechanic, except this time it feels more rewarding and special to receive these units. Lastly, we have the Skaven, walking, talking rat people coked up on Warpstone. These guys are the opposite of Lizardmen in many ways, extremely quick and weak but attack in large numbers from all directions. Their armies are made up of numerous variations of swarming rats, long-range missiles and experimental machines such as the Doomwheel and Hellpit Abomination. On the campaign, they spread a corruption to adjacent provinces and rely on food to grow. They also have a unique hidden mechanic, whereby their settlements appear undiscovered to other factions, allowing them to ambush wandering armies. For the most part, their food mechanic makes the campaign more interesting, much like the managing of slaves. However, the hidden mechanic doesn't really play out that well, as things like corruption give away their position, and AI armies tend to attack ruins with full armies anyway. So that's it for the races and their diversity. Each race also has 2 playable factions, each led by a legendary lord. They share the same army roster and building chains, but each lord has a unique starting location in the world, and unique traits and skill trees. It's also possible to acquire the other unique lord throughout your campaign through Confederation, giving you access to some of their benefits. Total War Warhammer 2's campaign is focused on the Great Vortex, a large and dominating hurricane of magical energy that each race is fighting for control of. Due to cosmic events, the races believe the vortex to be unstable, as delivered through beautiful 2D cutscenes at the beginning of the game. Now each race will attempt to gain control of the vortex to stop chaos from flooding into the world, or to destroy the world itself. To gain control, each race must complete random missions and conquer settlements in order to acquire a particular ritual currency. The currency falls under different names for each race, but it's all the exact same. Once you gather up enough of this currency, you're able to perform rituals to gain faction-wide benefits and push towards completing the final ritual, which will give you control of the vortex and ultimate victory in the campaign. It's a really cool idea. Having each race work towards a goal can place you under pressure to complete the final ritual for fear of losing to the enemy AI. You'll shift your priorities around of who you want to attack in order to slow them down, and determine where you want to conquer based off missions and ritual resource sites. It really shook up the generic Total War conquer whatever I want gameplay for the better, I feel.
The ritual is underway, my lord. Even working together, it will take your greatest adepts some time to complete. Such is the ritual's power that the great vortex itself distorts under its pull. Be wary, though, for while the vortex is weakened, the forces of chaos will slip into this world. Ready your defenses, for they will doubtless be drawn to the ritual's power.
The rituals you perform along the way, while interesting the first few times, become extreme slogs as the AI sends wave after wave of auto-generated armies at you or your surrounding towns. You'll end up fighting the same battles over and over again, and it really just is not fun to play. Switching from an aggressive playstyle to a defensive one as you hunker down to perform your rituals does force you to think a bit differently, and I think is one of the more fun aspects of the campaign. However, in the later stages, when 6 or 7 armies appear at random locations and scatter around your lands, it becomes an extremely laborious affair to chase down these armies. In context, these armies are supposed to be trying to stop your rituals, but often the AI determines that it can't beat your defenses and will raid your lands and destroy outer settlements. It's really quite unfair, because you may think to yourself, well, I'll just build up defenses in my towns. However, the AI will spawn in your least defended places, and when they spawn with 5 armies, they can beat any town defense you have, so often performing rituals is a guaranteed loss of settlements at random, and it just feels very cheap and artificial. As you progress and eventually reach the end of the game and the story, you'll realize it was all for nothing. Now there's minor spoilers here, but I'll keep it brief, so skip ahead a little bit if you want to avoid it. Essentially, there's a big plot twist regarding the vortex and your motivation for trying to control it. Now while this was really interesting to learn about, it kind of killed the replayability. Having a strategy sandbox game contain such a rigid story makes it extremely tedious to play through the same plot twist over and over again. Total War is at its best when it provides the tools to create an emergent narrative. You tell your own story. Instead, Warhammer 2 has provided an extremely lightweight story with deep roots in the world, meaning it can never change no matter what you do. The cutscenes were great, the writing was brilliant, but there's roughly only a total of 2 minutes of story for your 20-hour campaign. Now after beating one campaign, there's really no point in following along the same story again and again, apart from seeing the different art for each one. That's just the story though. The rituals themselves can also be largely ignored. If you lose the race to the AI, you'll be prompted to fight a final battle with whatever army you wish, and should you win it, that AI will be out of the Vortex race completely. The battle itself is not even hard, as your enemies lay down their weapons and fight together against a common foe. It's a 3v1 that you'll never lose, unless you're extremely far behind in the game that you can't even manage to get one army together. And if that's the case, you were losing anyway. As the High Elves, I was just 3 turns behind the Dark Elves, frantically trying to stop them from completing their ritual, only to find out that I could have just waited until the end. Then, a few turns later, in my final battle I was against the other 3 races, but I was given unlimited ammo, massive heal and explosion spells, and the enemy trickled in smaller waves, making it easy. Then on completion, you receive an extremely minor reward for the rest of your campaign, should you choose to continue to mop up. Overall, the implementation of the Vortex is a failure in my opinion. In premise, it felt similar to the Advent from XCOM 2, this ticking timer that you had to keep up with, but Creative Assembly couldn't fully commit to it, instead putting in several failsafes to make sure you couldn't lose, defeating the entire purpose. On top of that, the story is the same for each race, so playing multiple times is borderline pointless. If you want the regular Conquer Anything campaign with normal Total War games, you can sort of find that here, but you'll have to try and ignore the cutscenes, the giant UI bar and the constant messages and missions about the Vortex, not to mention the roaming Chaos, Norscan and Skaven armies that fight for rituals, and the enemy AI that is designed to attack and defend ritual sites. After beating the campaign in most Total War games, I immediately want to play another one. In Total War Warhammer 2, I'm not sure I have any motivation to play it again. Let's just get this straight out of the way off the bat. The campaign looks astonishing. The map is fixated on 4 continents of the Warhammer universe. To the southwest, you have the dense tropical jungles of Lustria, flanked by the large mountain range known as the Spine of Sotek. To the northwest lies Nagaroth, a largely barren and icy wasteland with chaos-corrupted mountain peaks and volcanoes. To the southeast is the Southlands, a large desert continent with a thin strip of mountains and jungles to the south. And lastly, to the northeast lies Ulthuan, a magical island with a pristine climate shielding the Great Vortex behind its impenetrable mountain fortresses. For geographical equivalence, this is basically South America, North America, Africa, and then a giant ring continent, so the game's scale is the most impressive in any Total War. Despite the scale, Creative Assembly have not skipped a beat on the detail. Zooming in all the way, I noticed lots of hidden nooks and crannies housing beautiful architecture, from dwarven mining networks to lizardmen temples and aqueducts, to even small remote caves, no doubt home to some mysterious creatures. The lighting is extremely pleasing to the eye, even in destitute areas, as God rays shine through the mountain peaks down on the charred terrain, and lava bubbles up from the cracked chaos earth. Coral reefs and rolling clouds overhead break apart the coastlines and add some colour to the endless ocean, which can also be rife with thunderstorms and whirlpools. The campaign map is by far the most impressive part of Total War Warhammer 2, and I think it's the most incredibly detailed map in any game yet, not just Total War. The texture quality and visual effects are extremely high, and the audio is excellent as you move your camera around the different props, mountain ranges and climates. And climate is important. Total War Warhammer 2 introduces the idea of persistent climates for the first time, with different races having different climate suitability preferences. There's 10 different climates and 10 different races, though most overlap somewhere in the middle for tropical style climates, while a few others prefer the chaos-ridden wastelands. It's a mechanic that plays out pretty nicely. You can conquer wherever you want, but climate will determine how easily you'll manage your settlements there, as it does affect public order, construction costs, income and more. So how does the campaign gameplay pan out? The main new features to this game are the Vortex mechanics and rituals, which we've already covered. Aside from that, for any Total War veteran out there, the gameplay is instantly familiar, as it's largely the same as Total War Warhammer 1, and is a simpler version of previous games like Total War Rome 2 and Total War Attila. For the uninitiated, the campaign is entirely turn-based, in which you play out your turn and then all the other factions play out theirs in the same sequence each time. The goal is conquest first and foremost, so you'll spend time building up settlements in order to sustain the armies that you field. Generally speaking, the only expenditure in the game on a turn-by-turn basis is army upkeep, and the main sources of income are taxes and trade. You use this excess income to then build new armies to conquer, and buildings to further your economy. The game also uses a provincial system, whereby regions will fit inside a province, and owning all regions will allow you to garner province-wide benefits. Each province has a capital settlement, which allows for higher tiered buildings. This is something I've mentioned before with previous Total War Warhammer game, but essentially factions have around 13 building chains that they can build, and when you own all regions in a province, you generally have around 13 building slots free. This essentially means that you can build everything you want, and since buildings have no negative effects, you can just progressively build up and double up on certain things like garrisons to bolster settlements and income buildings. The system lets you specialize regions to be recruiting areas, income areas, and does require some thought in the initial stages about what you want to prioritize. But once you get a bit further into your campaign, it becomes extremely easy to manage and you completely forget about provinces. For novices to strategy, this is a great way to jump in and learn in a very forgiving system, but for veterans, the simplification can leave them wanting more. Something that is sorely missed from this is a sense of immersion with the buildings and provinces in general. There's no visible population in settlements, just a growth number. When you lose a settlement or it gets burned to the ground, I never felt bad or cured other than the fact that I lost a little time investment. When you view settlements in the battles, they're completely empty, and while beautifully crafted, it's often hard to picture how anyone lives in these places, and there isn't one reason to believe anyone does. Other towns don't care when a city gets razed to ashes, millions potentially die, or hundreds, who knows, and nobody bats an eye. About 20 turns later, the town is back to where it was, and it's as if the great holocaust of Altdorf never happened. Now, I don't have time in this review to talk about why I feel this is important, especially to this series, but I'll get to it in the coming days on my channel. The bottom line is, if you care about immersion, it's lacking on the campaign. Resources have a significant impact on the campaign, and each one has its own unique building chain. Gathering these resources bolsters income, allows for more trade, provides small buffs to the province, and even ties into technology for the High Elves, which is a really nice addition. I think having these resource buildings does shake up the monotony of the copy-paste provinces you end up creating, though for every other faction they don't really have a secondary use for them. Trade on its own is such a frustrating experience that I'm surprised the whole race depends on it so heavily. All trade comes through your capital on the campaign. If your capital is on an island, such as it is for Teclis, then it seems you can only trade with those you've connected a port to. I owned the entire western coast of Lustria, bordering dwarfs, lizardmen and more, but I couldn't establish a trade route despite being able to see roads connecting our towns and being able to walk into their lands. You cannot move your capital to trade more effectively, and there's no visible trade routes on the map to relay any of that information to the player about why they can't establish a route. Trade also just provides money. You don't actually get the resource to do something with, so it's really just a shallow fabrication of what trade should be. Some of the new additions to Total War are the treasure hunts, encounters at sea, and rites. When armies march on ruins, they can perform a treasure hunt that will give you a small story and dilemma. These are interesting, but I often found that they were poorly written. Not for their use of creativity and intrigue, but for their disconnect with the results presented. You'll walk into a tomb and essentially anything can happen. You can decide to walk out, steal something, cast a spell or whatever, and nearly always the result seemingly has no bearing on what you were doing there. It's also written from a strange perspective. It says that you open things and you walk around, but I feel it should name your lord and even play off the traits that they have. It'd be pretty cool if a lord who has the brave trait gets a special response to use, and could end up getting him killed, or you could even return with something everyone else was too afraid to get. Instead, it's kind of impersonal, disconnected, and often not worth the extra turn to do it. Encounters at sea are pretty basic, but can be nice little stories and usually generate you nice items and other benefits. In the early game, these encounters are well worth getting, however later on, they're pretty irrelevant as you don't need whatever they give you most of the time. One encounter, the Skull Island, is a guaranteed 10,000 gold every time. Once I worked this out, I only ever went after those and it kinda killed the mystique around them. It's a nice idea though, and they do break up the early game. Rights are pretty simple faction-wide benefits that are different based on the race. Often they require a sum of gold or some currency to obtain, and provide fairly significant changes to your faction. The Lizardmen can perform a right to gain an instant massive army of monstrous units, and the Dark Elves can use rights to recruit their Black Arcs. It's a cool feature with a nice UI screen, and it gives the player something to work towards to make life easier and gain instant access to cool stuff. Essentially, in Total War Warhammer 2's campaign, you can't really do anything wrong, you can just do stuff better. There's always going to be an optimum way of doing things, but it's reasonably easy to figure that out here. You can't really build something wrong, lose growth and destabilize your economy with buildings, and because of that it's just very simple and it becomes a little bit boring. Armies can be created at any settlement by recruiting a lord and then added to with units from within your territory or from any point on the map through a global recruitment system. Doing it globally will incur cost and time penalties. The same works for army replenishment. If you've taken losses and want to recruit more men, the game will automatically replenish your troops should you be in your home territory or if you're in a particular army stance abroad. This replenishment system makes losing a particular unit in battle a little bit more costly, as they could have just been healed for free and will have to be re-recruited, which costs time and money. If the unit survived with even just one man remaining, it would eventually heal and replenish for free. The catch out of this is that while a unit may suffer losses, you still pay the full amount of upkeep each turn. This eliminates some of the tedium in sending armies home and manually paying for replenishing units, which can be confusing and take up time. However, this system again eats away at immersion. How are you recruiting troops hundreds of miles from home? Why are units costing the same to pay each turn if half of them are dead? These are some of the questions that immersive players would want to ask. The fact that troops heal quickly and for free creates a disconnect with the people in that unit. They don't really feel alive, more like numbers ticking along in a game system, and for the most part the system works. This in effect means you never really care when 100 troops die right in front of you. The loss of life is insignificant so long as the unit stays intact. So again, the gameplay is strong with this mechanic, but immersion is lacking. And I feel there is a middle ground to be had here, but again, I'll save it for another video of suggestions. Lords themselves are needed to recruit armies, and they have deep skill trees that allow for great customization. The skill trees have an available 40 slots to be filled between campaign effects, battle effects, personal effects, and faction effects. And there's no way to fill up everything, so choices need to be made about how you want to specialize your lords. One such lord for me was NG Benji, a lizardman lord I recruited to keep some unrest down in a province somewhere. Now while NG was helping the people, he gained traits over time that made him better at doing so as a direct result of him being amongst unhappy people. As he ranked up, I gave him upgrades that helped with public order, removing corruption, improving taxes, and recruiting units for cheap. He became a king of administration, and as his retinue expanded, I assigned him followers such as taxmen, logisticians, and administrators that all increased his effects further. If there was ever a town or province in trouble, NG Benji would go there and fix the problem in no time. It's been a long time since I formed any connection to generals in Total War, but with the depth of customization at hand, it makes it a lot easier to do so in Warhammer 2. The only downside to my lord was that he looked identical to the many others I recruited, and he never had any personality in battle as there's no speeches or any way of really distinguishing him from the others. Generals don't really age either, time doesn't really pass, and they never really die if you get the immortality trait, so you don't really have to worry about them in the same way. Now NG Benji will always have a soft spot in my heart, unlike his asshole brother Benki Enki. That guy's a real piece of work. The last notable interaction you can have on the campaign map is diplomacy. Diplomacy is how you deal with other AI factions in the game. For the most part, it works pretty well with what it lets you do. It gives you information about trade partners, wars and alliances, it lets you set war targets and more. It doesn't, however, let you set goals in a joint war or let you exchange provinces. This is particularly frustrating because of the province system. You may have an ally that takes a part of your province and you can't get its full benefits. Or worse, a faction that doesn't have a stake in the Vortex could take a settlement containing a ritual resource site and you've no other choice but to attack them to take it. It's a very one-dimensional system that doesn't really make me feel like I'm talking to a faction rather than just dealing with a particular mechanic that is often frustrating. There's no real back and forth or haggling to be had. It's like, hey, do you want to trade? No. Hey, do you want to trade and I'll give you money? No. Hey, do you want to trade and I'll give you more money? Yes. Okay, cool. Just like tell me what you want to do or try and haggle with me to get a better price. Also, it seems diplomacy has gotten more limited with the removal of the vassalization option completely from Warhammer 1, which again is disappointing. Battles on the campaign can be automatically resolved if you don't want to fight it out. The game will do its best to simulate the outcome of battle, but this auto-resolve is one of the worst in Total War's history. Often, the auto-resolve bar will display a loss for battles that are easily winnable by the player, and a win for battles that can actually be quite tricky if you were to fight it out. So essentially you're encouraged to fight the easy fights and skip the hard fights, which is the opposite of what should be taking place. This is seemingly because of the absence of reliable cause and effect for magic, which can spawn units for example, or freeze entire armies in place while you hit them with archers. Veterancy on units and lord levels tend to play an overblown effect also. Furthermore, getting caught in battle at sea is extremely unfair because of the auto-resolve. Battles you could easily win if you fought it out will see you losing entire armies at sea because Total War Warhammer 2 doesn't feature naval battles, despite around 30% of the map being ocean. Now some will cry that Games Workshop hold a license to naval battles from Creative Assembly, but I've seen no reliable source for this information, so I really don't believe that. Even if it were true, it's not a good excuse for the player. Whatever bureaucracy may be going on behind the scenes, it doesn't matter to the consumer as they're the ones paying to play a good game. Now I personally don't care much for naval battles anyway, but with the fantasy units I think you could balance it in a fun way, unlike the ramming only combat of certain historical Total War titles. Now the real issue I have is that the replacement for naval battles is just a completely borked auto-resolve. I'd rather there be no option for naval battles, instead transports just ferry troops to and from land, or battles be fought out on remote island maps to at least give you the opportunity to fight. Either way, it's terrible in its current implementation. Fighting out battles is what you'll spend about 20 to 30% of your time doing in Total War Warhammer 2. Out of the 210 turns I played in one campaign, I fought 188 battles and I played 60 of them myself. The battles feel well balanced for the campaign and look exceptionally good. The quality of models is at an all-time high for the series, as well as the animations and audio. This starts to fall apart slightly when you look at the single entity combat. Entities will miss their targets, swivel around without animating, and lock in and out of their animations, which really makes these powerful units look pretty stupid. monster's charges are appropriately over the top as entities get flung through the air on impact, and magic has significant influence, and you'll be making use of it regularly. The AI, while not perfect, does a good job of setting up battle lines, flanking maneuvers, and keeping their missiles out of combat most of the time. The morale of armies tends to break after significant damage has been done, or a lord has been killed, creating a mass rout, which gives a real sense of a great victory or a sudden defeat. The UI can get extremely cluttered at times, but has some nice features to allow you to configure what information is presented at any time, or when holding down the alternate view. This ranges from unit types, health bars, missile range, and even options to remove the foliage of trees should it obstruct your view. Most of this stuff is never really explained to you in the game, with the battle tutorial being extremely lacking in teaching players some of the basics to look out for. The in-game encyclopedia has even been removed completely in favour of a small set of YouTube videos that basically have no views. The 4 races have around 100 units available to choose from, with 4 new Lords of Magic containing 6 spells each. On top of this, there's all of the Warhammer 1 spells and units available to fight against, so the amount of variations possible in battle are huge. In reality though, these minor Warhammer 1 factions largely die out by the time you reach them, so I didn't actually get to fight many. Instead, I just fought against the core Warhammer 2 races a lot, and I would estimate about 90% of my battles were against these core races. Repetition and battle fatigue is something that I ran into very quickly. It'll only take a matter of a few hours before you see the same maps and fight the same enemies on them. Even across continents, you'll come across the same battle maps, which really breaks the immersion that you're fighting in that part of the world. Every now and then a map will load where you'll recognize where you are, and it really elevates the experience of the game. Oh, that's cool. We can see the Bretonnian town in the background. I like that. Oh, and we can tell that we're on an island. That is nice. I want to compliment the game on that. Too often this game makes you feel like disconnected from the campaign. The fact that this tile is so accurately being represented right now, very happy to see that. We're in a little patch of islands. There's Bretonnian towns even out at the island. That, great detail. It used to be in all the old games. It's been sorely missed. I love seeing that when it goes right. When it goes wrong, it still happens in this game, but gotta shout out when it goes right. In the older titles, terrain was generated based on algorithms, and you could see your fleets in the distance, towns and cities where they should be, and land that represented the map you were on. In Total War Warhammer 2, it seems random maps will load based on climate, and your reinforcements will arrive in random places. They've said they've achieved handcrafted maps in this game as a selling point, but a lot of maps I've come across have been low quality and uninteresting, to the point where entire sections look unfinished or unplayable to your troops. Let's front load this area with dinosaurs. What is this? Oh, this is water. Impassable water. What? This is all impassable terrain? How bizarre. It's very weird, isn't it? It's not a river. Well, it kind of is. I'm looking up here as well, like trying to see. It's not blocked out, but it's definitely sunken in. That's bad. Handcrafted maps, my anus. As well as that, Warhammer 1 maps are present in the game, but load the new Warhammer 2 lighting and terrain and often look extremely out of place. I don't mind this, where it's like, yeah, it's a little bit up and down, you can believe sand blows in and stuff, but whole houses like engulfed, this mill, it can't turn. Like, oh, I don't know. It looks kind of nice though, like out from a distance. Like, oh yeah, it's like a real sandy kind of Bretonnian settlement. I think it's cool. It's just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel lived in. This is one of my problems. Like, nothing in this game, you wouldn't think that anyone lives in any of these things. Because you're fighting the same enemies over and over, you'll often get used to doing the same formations and tactics over and over. Something noticeable is that even with the Skaven's superior numbers, they'll always just bunch up, allowing you to cast mass debuff spells and ranged attacks. It's a pretty big problem with the AI that they never seem to use their numbers to their advantage, instead creating large bottlenecks for themselves unnecessarily. And bottlenecks are now a feature, as Warhammer 2 has reintroduced river crossing battles. While they do look nice and have been a long featured fan request, I find them to be really uninteresting as two sides clash and you end up waiting out the fight with little else to do other than call upon artillery. I feel the maps need multiple crossing points that aren't just right next to each other, elevated terrain or something on each side to break up the monotony. Choke point battles also don't seem to have much tactical implication on the campaign map. Sitting on rivers or canyons trigger choke point battles in the old games, but now they seem to appear almost randomly and even in place of settlements. This makes it very hard to determine where you should take a defensive stand as you would normally. A check terrain feature at any point in the map would be pretty cool, as you can do it before the battle, but really choke points should only appear on rivers and mountain passes and nowhere else. Next up is siege battles. A long criticized element from Total War Warhammer 1, it's sad to say that sieges have not changed in Total War Warhammer 2. The main issue, yet again, is repetition. Each siege essentially plays out the exact same. A mad dash for the walls, scramble over them any way you can, either with equipment or without, fight on the walls for a bit and then push to the center. It's always the same. The first 10 you do can be very exciting, but the AI never change pattern and become very predictable. Players almost have no freedom in how they approach these settlements, and each settlement has just one line of defense usually. There's really not much else to say here. Unfortunately, settlements that house thousands or millions of citizens only let you fight in a very small part of the settlement, with beautiful architecture, streets and river crossings teasing you outside of the playable area. The AI does an okay job of defending and attacking. They never do anything particularly smart, however there's a huge disconnect between the AI's magic uses and the battle itself. It seems the AI will only ever use spells on units instead of on the terrain. Wind spells, spells that travel in long lines, will often be cast on single entities or in the wrong direction. Bombard spells, spells that hit a group of enemies, will be cast on moving towers and miss them completely, and spawning spells such as the Skaven's Menace below will spawn a unit outside of the settlement walls before the AI decides they need to return and re-enter the settlement. This is because the defensive siege AI doesn't ever want to have a unit outside of its walls, and spawning one there means it's going to pull it back in instantly. What's worse is this particular problem will open the gates, rendering any unit attacking it immobile and unable to attack the gate. Your attacking unit may even accidentally walk into the settlement and not be able to move or get out because the gate is locked, even though it's open. It's a huge problem that is almost guaranteed to happen each time you attack a Skaven city, and it's been plaguing the franchise since Rome 2. The fact that it's a legacy bug adds insult to injury when the game is charging full price for content and issues present in older games that people have voiced their concerns about. Last in the battle spectrum are quest battles. There are 17 quest battles in Warhammer 2 and they're easily the most fun aspect of the game. You can access them from the front end menu screen or go on quests in your campaigns to fight them. They have little voice cutscenes beforehand, and while some can be underwhelming, others can present new and unique ways to fight and are almost like boss battles in many ways, asking you to kill and take down unique units in order to earn campaign rewards.
The creatures that remain will become ever more craven. Let me deal with the bat. It has slain 2 creatures of Alt 1, and they must be avenged!
You can play multiplayer battles in Warhammer 2 of up to 8 players in a 4v4 fight, or do a 4-player free-for-all in which all players fight against each other. There's also the ranked battles, which are 1v1, which I guess makes it the main mode for the multiplayer community. Personally, I've never really enjoyed the multiplayer aspect of Total War Warhammer. It's extremely micro-intensive and fast-paced, with battles lasting around 3 minutes, discounting the time it takes to walk up to each other. The battles are often very small, with most standard builds bringing around 800 troops on average. It's just not something that has ever appealed to me, and as of writing this, out of the 24,000 people that are currently playing, there's 20 game lobbies in the server browser. I'm sure that it has more people searching the ranked battles, but it is still extremely niche. However, it does have a vocal following behind it. To me though, it kind of goes against the grain of Total War, which, as I understood it, was supposed to be about recreating large-scale battles on a somewhat realistic scale. I don't mind fantasy units, in fact I really wanted to get into Warhammer, but if you were to watch something like Lord of the Rings and 800 people were fighting in the battle and it ended in 5 minutes, I think it would lose some of its appeal. Where Total War multiplayer does shine for me though is in co-op and head-to-head modes on the campaign. You can jump in with a friend and join forces to tackle the campaign, or go head-to-head and work to fight each other. If you go into battle against an AI faction, your friend will step in for the AI and do their best to win. Only Marathi benefits from Chaos Corruption, and no, I don't have it. It isn't easy because I'm playing against fucking Ninja Hund. Every fight is controlled by Ninja Hund. There's no win in that fight. They're able to just double their force almost instantly. Difficulty, Ninja Hund. It's like 1 above legendary. Basically is. It's extremely fun because it removes some of the repetition and predictability of the AI. In a co-op situation, you can gift your friend units in real time so they can take over the cavalry, and you can manage the infantry or whatever combination you wanted. It is, in my opinion, the best way to play the campaign. It hasn't changed much since it was introduced with Napoleon, but I'd love to see more players, especially since 4 races fight for the Vortex. It seems like a missed golden opportunity to have 3 other friends play with you. Focusing on what Total War Warhammer 2 does right is easy. The battles are fun. The graphical fidelity is among the best in any strategy game. The UI has been streamlined for the better, and the lore of Warhammer Fantasy, while never really introduced properly, has been brought to life here through well-crafted stories and interesting characters. What holds the game back from being great are long-standing issues with the series and the failure of newly introduced features. The Vortex is anticlimactic and completely irrelevant. The battle maps are repetitive both in terms of design and in gameplay, especially the sieges. Immersion is at an all-time low, with no real link between your battles and the campaign, the soldiers fighting, or the people you're managing. If you've never played strategy games before, you'll probably get a lot out of this game in your first few campaigns. I'd recommend it. If you're a Warhammer 1 fan and you don't mind some of its shortcomings, you'll get the same gameplay here with some minor improvements, so Warhammer 2 is probably a great fit for you. If you're a veteran of Total War and strategy in general, this title doesn't do anything to push the genre or franchise forward in any way. Instead, it asks for full price when it shares a huge amount of assets and gameplay with its predecessor, and fails to build on its most frustrating issues. Hey everybody, thanks very much for watching. Republic of Play reviews are funded on Patreon. If you like this video and want to have a say in what games or DLC we cover next, or just support the channel in general, consider checking out the rewards over there. Don't forget, you can also support the show by sharing this video with friends, liking it, and letting me know what you thought below. As always, I'll be replying to the comments. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.